Thanks to Matthew, Arnold and Baldwin for inviting us here today. You laid down some really interesting trends there and challenges. I hope we can give our perspectives on it, a little bit more granularity behind it, but also suggest some solutions. And these are solutions that we come out really for Big Pharma, but also for the small, medium enterprises as well, supporting Big Pharma as they go through. So we'll be sharing some of our thoughts around that once I get some slides. Within PwC then, we probably consult from the full gamut of consulting services. People are looking to grow, we get involved in strategy and deals behind that. You can also get involved in terms of performance improvement and when people really need to up their game to compete on a global scale. And unfortunately, we also get involved when businesses go sour. So our business recovery services business, again, we get the opportunity to come in and restructure some businesses along the way there as well. So what I'm going to do really today is just sort of summarize and give you the headlines from Pharma 2020. The last paper was produced about 18 months ago, and I heard some chatter over lunch there. Yes, the original paper came out in 2007, the original 2020 paper. Now, that was quite controversial when we produced that. And in fact, presentations like this for me were quite tough because a lot of people were saying this isn't going to happen or the regulators aren't going to change, etc. I'm pleased when we refreshed this 18 months ago, it was a degree of saying, well, yes, a lot of those predictions did come true. And in fact, we've got tangible evidence of where the industry has begun to live up to those changes and adapt along the way as well. So this is a slightly different paper in that it's got lots more sort of success stories and things like that to learn from. Each paper itself is about 40 pages long, so I can't really do it justice in about 40 minutes. But nonetheless, please look at our website, pwc.com/pharma2020, and you can download those all free of charge. You also get signed up for updates as we go through and refresh them. So we're going to do a double act today. So I'll kick off with really talking about some of the market conditions and some of the challenges facing the pharma industry on a global basis. And then Steve's going to come up with solutions, as usual. So he's talking about particularly the levers that pharma companies can use to play. And I think the third element, we've called it biotech business models, but it's the point that Paul was raising. It's around collaboration, strategic alliances to really further a lot of aspects within pharma and what the challenges that people need to meet. So that's sort of the structure of the presentation today. So I'll kick off with some of the market conditions here. And I suppose the good news is that pharma is increasing in value. Globally, it's about $1.1 trillion today, and will grow to in 2020 to $1.6 trillion. The good news behind that is that a lot of that growth is because we're living longer, we're getting richer. The bad news, of course, is we're all getting fatter. So a lot of that growth is driven by demands related with diseases associated with obesity, which is a huge, huge element in terms of that. Now, in terms of the split in 2020, you can see that the US will still dominate at about 27% of the market. EU5, it will contract, going from 18% to 12%. And in fact, the growth markets will be where the key growth drivers are, from 20% to 32%. And increasingly now, as you know, it's much easier to do business on a global scale. A lot of trade barriers have been falling, etc., within that, and the volume of export flows has gone up significantly beyond that. So very much a global playing field that people are operating in. Not so rosy if you live in Southern Europe. So the GIPS markets, Greece, Italy, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain, they're seeing a contraction in their markets going out to 2020. So going from $82 billion today to $71 billion. And you can see all of those countries have seen a contraction. Now, a lot of that is pricing contraction. And again, if you serve the Irish market, you'll have seen continual pricing cuts that have come through from Ireland. Italy, about 18 months ago, launched a pro-generic strategy. Now, again, a lot of these southern European states are very pro-branded generics. They still don't necessarily trust the white-label generics we're very familiar with in the UK. And yet in Italy, they launched a pro-generic strategy about 2 years ago, and that took people a lot by surprise. So you're seeing a lot of contraction in those markets. So the key thing is that things will need to change in those markets there. This is just some of the stats, and I'll let you lead these in your leisure. They're in the pack here. But, I mean, this is the burden of chronic long-term disease that's going through. And, again, we saw the news today about diabetes, with 700 new cases of type 2 diabetes diagnosed per day, and with a prevalence around 4 million in the UK alone. So you can see just the significance of some of these chronic conditions. So we termed a term for those, Hondas. It's not a Japanese four-wheeled vehicle. It's your worst sort of patient. It's a hypertensive, obese, non-compliant, diabetic asthmatic. And with that collection of comorbidities, responsible for 70% of the healthcare costs. Now, as Paul mentioned, you're seeing that's why you've now got the shift on in terms of prevention, because a lot of those conditions are preventable. I think our challenge as the industry is, are you necessarily being rewarded or incentivized to come up with those prevention measures? Because you need to, because if you look at healthcare economies, those economies and budgets are finite and increasingly being challenged. Healthcare costs as a percentage of GDP are well over 15, 20, some towards 19% of GDP per annum. So equivalent to the war effort, actually, in terms of amount of money going in. And Paul mentioned today about some of the NHS work, which we were sort of the analytical backbone behind, that the NHS could end up with a £30 billion deficit by 2020. So clearly there's a requirement to do things differently within that. And you're beginning to see that happen. I mean, in the US now you've got the Affordable Care Act is now law. The good news around that was expanded coverage and addressed the uninsured in that market. But actually, as part actually really incentivized controlling the market and controlling cost while improving quality. So in fact, the Affordable Care Act wasn't great news for the innovative pharma industry. You get a modest uplift of around $15 billion per annum, which is by supplying products to the uninsured. But at the same time, through Medicare Part D, we estimate about $155 billion contraction within that. And then also, I think those last 2 points on there, the shift more to outcomes-based contracting, PCORI, etc., is really shaking up the US system as well. So perhaps we can just discuss that in Q&A. I'd be interested to see if you're seeing some of those trends play through in terms of your business. As you know, we're seeing a similar picture across Europe. So in Germany, they passed the AMNOG bill in 2010, which is looking for clinical comparativeness, effectiveness and evidence of that within a year of launch, which has made the German market very, very tough. In fact, to get a new diabetes product to market in Germany can have a very, very high hurdle indeed. In the UK, we've got the new PPRS, which has been in place from January 2014. I don't know if you've been following that, but as you're probably aware, value-based pricing was meant to be a key part of that. And in fact, under Andrew Lansley with the NHS White Paper, value-based contracting was going to be a key part of the remuneration system. As you know, that was dropped, and I think dropped for a number of reasons. One of which was they were looking for one size fits all. With something as sophisticated as value-based pricing, it can be very, very difficult to get one size fits all as a solution. So what have we got now? Well, we've got really effectively capping the drug spend on capping drug spend, year-on-year cost reductions, and managing it through rebates. And then similarly across the rest of those developed markets, France, Canada, and Japan, you're seeing similar sort of cost-effectiveness measures come to the fore. So consequently, generic spending will increase by 35 to 40 billion over the next 5 years. And healthcare payers are really requiring medicines which are both clinically and economically better than what's already available. And we as patients are looking for products that just don't merely treat disease, but can actually cure and prevent disease as we go through. So mature markets will be a challenge, and as Paul mentioned, the mature market approach of if you get more, you should pay more, isn't really the paradigm by which people are working for. In fact, you're looking for incremental innovation, preferably at the same cost as existing treatments, if not less within that. And also, I think the fact is because of the inherent timing in the system within the industry, it takes a long time for companies to respond. So if you remember, the drugs coming to market today are the result of portfolio decisions made potentially up to 10 years ago, so where the environment was a very, very different one today. I think on the plus side, though, we're seeing people begin to adapt to this new environment. So then if people say, well, the mature market's stagnating and again becoming quite price austere, what about the emerging markets and the growth markets? And nonetheless, the growth stats there are quite attractive, really doubling in size up to $500 billion by 2020. And you can see China there dominating at 34%. And we've got a collection of fast follower markets there, which is 37%. Now, Paul mentioned Jim O'Neill, from who coined the phrase brick and mint, which is great. If someone can come up with an acronym for the fast follower markets, you get a prize from me. And the fast follower markets in small print at the bottom are Argentina, Egypt, Indonesia, Mexico, Pakistan, Poland, Romania, South Africa, Thailand, Turkey, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Vietnam. So if you've got a quiet moment with a Scrabble kit, maybe you can come up and email me with some ideas from that, and I will credit you. Now, again, those markets are very different. Yes, brick MT is pretty large, and worth going in with a very different model. If you look at those fast-following markets, very heterogeneous, very different healthcare systems behind it, fantastic growth, but from a very, very low base. And these are the challenges that I think the industry is facing at the moment. Now, one of the challenges here is really the fact that they're fast-growing, but from a very, very low base. India, yes, is growing at 24% per annum in terms of healthcare spend. But if you look at the per capita healthcare spend, it's $54 per annum, compared to about $4,000 in Europe and $8,000 in the States. Now, that's just healthcare spend. The drugs element of that healthcare spend is 15%. So you're looking at a population where it's potentially $9 per annum that these people have got to spend on drugs, which really challenges, they're not ready yet for the disease-modifying biologic treatments that we can bring to market. And yet you're seeing a lot of the pharma companies going in, particularly buying branded generic companies and building a brand presence to build on that growth. But then people often say, what about the middle class? And if you look at the middle class population in China, that's worth a couple of European countries alone. And nonetheless, you can see that they're pretty large in terms of those populations there. So by 2025, about 75% of China will be classed as middle class. So that's where a lot of the growth is coming from. But also, if you look at what the OECD definition of middle class is, it's populations with an income between $6,000 and $30,000 per annum. So again, relatively low in Western standards. And if you look at, again, the challenge, would they be able to buy expensive cancer therapies? Potentially not. Which again is why you're seeing companies like Roche go into China with private medical insurance and private financing systems to get products like Herceptin into the hands of the patients who need them. So this is probably my most controversial slide, actually, and this shows where the net growth is going out to 2020. So overall, it's growing in some of the established markets, such as the USA, etc. And you can see a kind of 50-50 growth between innovative products and generics. So generics is the light bar, and patented products is the dark bar. So US, overall net growth, 50-50 across the two. China, again, significant growth there with a more bias towards generics. But just look at that top line. Look at the European Big Five, where you can see we predict a contraction in the market. And that's a contraction of about 6% per annum, and particularly hitting patented products. Now, that's really pricing and continued pricing controls and pressure on that, and also market access that we predict will become much more restrictive over time. So that's the kind of doom and gloom piece, or at least the challenges piece about where the industry is heading. I'll hand over to Steve now to talk about some of the solutions.
Thanks very much. So one of the biggest challenges for the pharma industry is R&D. It's the lifeblood of the industry, yet there's a big question of how is the pharma industry going to continue to innovate and continue to bring innovative products through the pipeline and onto the market. And we're going to touch on some of the importance of patient outcomes data and how that impacts R&D, and then also look to the future and say in 2020, how are we going to leverage technology and bring and create new channels to market? So Huxley, who was many things but was also a philosopher, said, the great tragedy of science is the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by an ugly fact. So you can translate that to have a clinical trial result that didn't happen as we wanted it to. But we think that R&D can really transform the industry's fortunes. But we have to embrace new technologies from IT. We have to really focus on understanding the pathophysiology of the disease and combining that with the medical interventions and amalgamating them. We have to focus on proving health economic benefit in terms of the patients, the payors and the providers of healthcare. And fundamentally, we have to think like an investor. So what do I mean by that? Is we can't develop a drug that doesn't have a price, that doesn't get reimbursement in this more challenging reimbursement environment. So how bad is it? Is it the worst of times? Well, R&D productivity has declined or remained static for the last 15 years. The cost of getting an approved product to market is somewhere between $2.5 to $5 billion. So that cost is completely unsustainable. And particularly if you look at big pharmas, the patent cliff impacted them from 2012 to 2018. Some $150 billion is expected to be wiped off revenue. So healthcare, as we look into 2020, is becoming an unsustainable proportion of GDP. for both poor and rich countries alike. So there's a need for society, for pharma, for healthcare payers and providers to really focus on cure and prevention of diseases rather than the treatment of diseases. This is a real business model change for the pharma industry. And to be fair, I mean, if you look back, the pharma industry has made a lot of money out of treating diseases and sometimes at best just maintaining those diseases with patients taking the drugs for a long period of time. So what we think is there's a real need to focus on the customer and delivering value to the customer. And R&D can be the tool that can create that, as long as we focus on the value to the patient. So if today's challenge is getting to tomorrow, tomorrow's challenge is being able to develop medicines that cure, improve, or prevent those previously incurable diseases, but actually getting a fair price for them. But a lot of the conditions that will be in place in 2020 are already in place today. So the question is pharma's fate actually sealed? Well, we don't think so. And the reason why we don't think so is because if you think about the path that you take and you focus on patient outcome data, we think it's the vital lever to drive change in the industry. If the whole industry focuses on patient outcome data, we can really transform it. So it's not just about cutting costs, cutting sales and marketing costs, extending the patent lives, or kicking our scientists so that they work much harder and improve R&D productivity. It's a matter of bringing patient outcome data to the market, and that will transform the industry. It will transform what we do and how we do it. So this is the new world where R&D, health economics, and marketing all work together to try and bring patient outcome data to the fore. We'll be able to focus on creating and proving value for the customers. Now, in order to do that, we'll need economic endpoints and real-world data. So what do I mean by economic endpoints? I mean understanding the value that a drug can bring in dollar terms, in changing the health pathway and proving that in the marketplace. Real-world data. This is not data popping out of clinical trials. It's data from patients, tens of thousands of patients in the marketplace taking your drug along with many other drugs that they take in the real world, and then understanding that data and collecting it. So in order to bring a drug to market, we're going to have to think about the health economics, and we're going to have to think about delivering value to the customer. And fundamentally, that means there's a new equation. Outcomes proof equals price. If you can demonstrate real patient outcomes, you can get premium price. So in order to bring outcomes data to the market and collect it, we need to build new relationships, we need new ways of working, whether you're developing drugs or whether you have in-market drugs already. So we're going to have to refine the way we design our trials so that we capture and integrate the outcomes data. We're going to have early engagement with the payors to understand what value means to them. What evidence are we going to have to collect? In different markets, we're going to have to understand what the comparators are. What are the gold standard products that we have to beat in order to get reimbursement and market access? We're going to need access to multiple data collection points. How do we collect those data? Where do we get that data from? And we're going to need revised payer strategies. Most payers nowadays expect comparative effectiveness studies, so we're going to need to know how we can compare our product to the drugs that are out there. It needs a willingness to take risks for experimentation, because fundamentally there are a new set of rules between the customer and the industry. Change is underway though. Lots of companies are doing things, and the global industry actually cut its research for the first time in 2010. About $135 billion was spent on R&D, which is about 19% of sales. By 2018, that's expected to reduce to 17%. And Tufts tell us that between 2006 and 2012, 263,000 people lost their job in the pharma industry, 10% of those in R&D. So lots of companies are adopting different strategies, and there's some examples here, but AbbVie was spun out of Abbott to create an independent pharmaceutical company just focusing on pharmaceuticals. So we're going to have to change the way we search for leads. There's going to be an increased focus on genomics and pharmacogenomics, so that's the drug response to different genotypes. 94% of companies tell us that they're investing in personalized medicine. 81% of companies are partnering in personalised medicine. 50% of today's trials involve collection of some DNA samples, but the telling point here is the last one. Only 10% of compounds in phase 2b to phase 4 have a companion diagnostic. So what that tells us is there's a significant way before the promise of personalised medicine comes to fruition. But there are new entrants, there are new vaccines, there are new human-computer interfaces with biomonitoring technologies, self-regulating drug delivery technologies, regenerative medicine. Some of the vaccines in development at the moment, there is a vaccine for atherosclerosis, for diabetes, for alcohol and drug dependency. There are artificial organs and exoskeletons. So the the industry is moving away from small molecules, focusing on biologics, focusing on these other preventative and curative methods and areas of research. We're going to have to change the way we bring products to market. And what this chart shows that if you bring a product to market with a companion diagnostic, you can get premium pricing, even in today's world where payers and providers are really negotiating hard on price points. So what we're saying is you're going to have to partner, you're going to have to outsource and partner with different types of businesses, companion diagnostic developers, for example. So what other partners do you need? Well, previously and historically, the regulator is seen very much as a hurdle, but we're saying that early engagement with the regulator is absolutely essential these days. The European Medicines Agency, the FDA, emerging market regulators such as the Sino-FDA, they're all talking to each other. There really is global regulation. Now there are local laws, but they are speaking to each other and they do collaborate. So whether it's coordinated action for enforcement, safety or inspections. Governments, for example, are placing significant pricing controls. They're capitating, they're demanding pay for performance, they're demanding discounts and rebates on their drugs, and there's unofficial drug rationing going on. So early engagement with the regulator is absolutely essential. So not only do you have to deal with the medicines regulator, there's another regulator, the compliance regulator. In the United States, between 2000 and 2012, 226 settlements involving pharma companies cost the industry more than $30 billion. The Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act, the Anti-Bribery and Corruption Act, data protection and privacy all place a huge compliance burden on our industry and our companies. And some people say that that's just the cost of doing business. But we say understanding the compliant rules is more than important, it's absolutely vital, and it can be a competitive advantage. If you're able to produce high quality, be completely compliant, have a good reputation and trust, you can get to market quicker, you can get higher volumes, but the converse is true. If you're non-compliant, you can lose your market in a territory as quickly as you've developed it, very quickly, as we've seen in the press recently. So I'm going to stop talking about what's going on at the moment and start looking forward to 2020, to the future, and how technology will drive benefit in the pharma industry. Technology integrated into the pharmaceutical business can create clusters of products. It can allow pharma to work more closely with payers, with patients, with doctors, to develop value for all. It will help pharma learn more about the diseases, the pathophysiology of diseases, which they can capitalise on, and it will help pharma go to market with these new technologies to leverage emerging and new channels to market. But a lot of the infrastructure that's needed is already present. It's probably in your pocket. Perish the thought it might be in your hands right now. Smartphones. Smartphones are going to be the future. It's going to be ubiquitous across the globe by 2020. Wireless is everywhere, so we're going to have wireless patient monitoring. We've got open innovation and crowdsourcing everywhere. Just some examples. So Novo and Lilly both have a medical device that can test your blood glucose level. You plug it into your iPhone, and there's an app on your phone that will tell you how much your blood glucose level is. There are biosensors that will tell you how much food, everything we need to know about what we're eating and drinking, how much exercise we take, to remind us that we need to go to the gym because we haven't been for a while. And the worst one for me, there's even an alarm on your fridge that can tell you when it's 12 o'clock and you're going for that midnight snack, that diet-busting midnight snack, and it will go off and wake everyone in the house up to stop you opening it. So I think pharma will benefit as more technologies come to the fore. There's an app on a phone. Patients can record their own well-being, their medical progress. They can capture their symptoms and refer them, and then that can wirelessly be sent to the doctor. You can get quick referrals being made. Proteus is developing a chip on a pill, an ingestible chip on a pill, combined with an app that can help you to monitor patient compliance. So your doctor or a relative can identify when you've taken or you haven't taken your pill. So relatives can phone you up and say, it's time for you to take your pill. So what this is, if you have a single interactive home device that captures patient records, sends that information to your doctors, updates your electronic medical records, you're in a connected world, a healthcare world, where your conditions are managed remotely in the community, physicians can respond and adapt their treatment, compliance is monitored and managed through the devices, and the support infrastructure that's already there can be placed around the patient. So as someone who's just entered their 40s, I think this is a fantastic time for us. So I'm going to have my health monitored all the time. The alarm on a fridge does fill me with dread, though. But thanks so much. I'll pass back to Jay.
Well, thanks, Steve. So I think we saw there's some tangible solutions that are possible. I'll just talk very briefly about some of the business models that might accommodate that, because you can see in this new world, the industry has to access new assets and new skills that they don't necessarily used to. And so our view is strategic collaboration and alliances is the key to go. So I'm going to just present a small section now on biotech business models. And as I go through, I want to clarify that biotech for us is a small, fast-growing company, not necessarily a company based on biotechnology. That obviously includes the two. So it's interesting, I think if you look back in time, the biotech industry itself has really resulted in a lot of the blockbuster drugs that we know today. I mean, Humira at the bottom there is now the largest selling drug in the world. And a lot of those are very, very familiar drugs that we know are really disease-modifying and offer a lot of patient-centered outcomes from that. If you look at the attributes that led to those success stories, they're quite similar. A lot of those companies had their origins in the US, very well funded, had an IPO somewhere along the way, and then also a big pharma acquisition. So we would argue that biotech itself has been a great drive of innovation for the industry. However, the conditions that fostered that industry are under change. I wouldn't say under pressure, but under change. There's no question the research base is shifting to the East. And yes, currently science is cheaper in the East, in India and China. Now, I'm part Chinese and I was a scientist, so I can say this, but a lot of people would also say, but Chinese people don't necessarily think about things the same way that we do in the West. The scientific brain isn't geared up in the same way. Alongside that, you've got people returning to China. So around 200,000 people have gone back to China in the last 10 years with pharma experience gathered in the West or have been to Western business schools. So again, driving through Chinese companies with a very much a Western mindset. Similarly then, governments in those emerging regions are really investing heavily, and we do a lot of work in this. So China itself is investing $19 billion to stimulate pharma R&D in the next 20 years. South Korea is putting $9.6 billion in. Now, all the stuff in the Office of Life Science is tremendous in terms of funding going into that, but that's in the hundreds of millions, nothing really on a scale of that. And we've, particularly with the work we've done, there's a degree of build it, they will come mentality behind those very, very bold schemes that people come through. At the same time, venture capital, and particularly those ones in Europe, are increasingly becoming impatient with biotech. Although a lot of investments were made, if you look at the realized value from those investments, it's around 15% actually. And those were under strain previously because you couldn't realize those investments by either getting it way through an IPO or a trade sale. Slightly changed, and I'll go into a little bit of the positive side behind that. So to fill the gap, you've got corporate venturing. So again, if you look inside any big pharma company, there tends to be a corporate VC arm in there focused on stimulating innovation and funding those biotech companies. Now, that's either captive, so for the use of the big pharma, or genuinely open, such as the Stevenage biocluster that was described there earlier. So an interesting mix of that as well. This is just showing how differently, though, the US has broken away, and I think they have. If you look around financial crisis at 2006, so 2008, it was pretty much neck and neck between European biotech exit multiples and US exit multiples. Now, if you look at the lighter of those two red lines, you can see how much the US has broken away in the last 4 years. I think a lot of the reason for that is direct funding from the NIH into innovation that's then stimulated the VC community and interest in the sector, and also IPOs. And you'll see a flurry of IPOs to the latter part of last year that stimulated a lot of excitement in JP Morgan in January. So again, that's stimulating a lot of interest in the US. And I'm just hoping that we'll see some of that overspill now in Europe. So I think I probably covered some of that. So how can people do things differently? Well, a lot of it, as I mentioned, is around collaboration. So in the biotech paper, we talk about pre-competitive discovery federations. This is really pooling knowledge in a non-competitive way to come up with better ideas. It very much is the open innovation type model that's happening in Stevenage and another couple of bioclusters around. And particularly for those areas where we really realize our knowledge is at its limits. So systems biology, pathophysiology, biomarkers, functional proteomics, those sorts of areas. And I'm really pleased to say that every time I present this, I have to update my examples. But we've got the IMI, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is driving a lot of this, the Asian Cancer Fund. NCATS in the States is really looking at 23 molecules, and really see, can these molecules be repurposed? They got 23 molecules from AstraZeneca, along with some AstraZeneca scientists behind it, to see if those can be repurposed. And I think the particularly exciting news that happened last week was, 2 weeks ago, was the G8 summit on Alzheimer's, where I was very lucky to be present. Jeremy Hunt presented in the morning, and David Cameron presented in the afternoon, and launched there very much a global public-private partnership to focus on Alzheimer's. So we cleared Alzheimer's here as one of the examples. Alzheimer's, as you may know, high unmet need in terms of health economic benefit and social benefit, but also high risk. And we'll have seen a lot of spectacular late-stage failures in the area of Alzheimer's. So it's clear that our knowledge of science is not necessarily good enough under traditional pharma approaches to actually come up with preventions or cure for Alzheimer's. So this is one area where you're seeing a lot of companies collaborate in an open innovation way. And in fact, as part of that G8 initiative, GSK, Eisai, AstraZeneca, Otsuka, J&J, and Genomics England have already linked up there with $100 million across the G8 countries to look at biomarkers and data. I think the interesting thing with that collaboration as well is they're looking at novel funding mechanisms. So things like a social impact bond that could actually go into Alzheimer's research, or indeed crowdfunding. And a lot of economists have been saying, you know, if you had a certain proportion of households donate $3,000 or $5,000 to Alzheimer's research, you could really move the needle. So that might produce better ideas. If you move further down the pharma value chain, how best to develop those? Well, again, we think the idea is around collaboration, so competitive development consortia. And you're beginning to see that happen now as well. I mean, BMS and Roche got together with multiple myeloma. ViiV, which was the link up between GSK and Pfizer, again is an example of those competitive consortia. And in other industries, those have been in existence for a long time. So the car industry, for instance, you get BMW, Daimler, General Motors collaborating on a powertrain. They realize now their competitive advantage is how you dress up that powertrain and make it look like a BMW or make it look like a Vauxhall car, what have you. But in fact, it was in their interest to pool knowledge about hybrid technologies and the powertrain in order to get that through. And I think it's really interesting to see what's happened between GSK and Novartis and oncology and vaccines and consumer healthcare, you could argue, in terms of having those more complex deals where, in fact, the value and power will shift as projects advance. The benefit of that, then, is you'll have clinical testing in the most appropriate environment, and we're beginning to see clinical testing happening more and more within the NHS, for instance, and then actually coming with better and cheaper products to market. So the idea is if you can come up with better ideas in the first place, develop them in a very cost-effective way, and have transparent testing, you can de-risk the investment profile within pharma R&D and actually appeal then to more risk-averse investors who are more willing to fund these sorts of mechanisms. So that's just an insight in terms of those signs of alliances. Again, quite futuristic when we first spoke about it 5 years ago. Now, as I said, I'm quite rich with examples to talk about there. And again, core to all of these consortia is data aggregators. Paul mentioned the explosion of big data, and Steve suggested how we would use it in terms of managing people's diets, etc. You can just see the plethora of data that's available there. And so we believe that there is a strong role for a data aggregator at the centre. And I guess a question which we could explore more in the Q&A is who's going to be owning that data at the centre? Is it going to be someone with a reputable brand? Is it going to be someone renowned for really intelligent data mining? Our premise is it probably won't be the pharma industry. The pharma industry will sort of remain as a user and recipient of that data. So really, I mean, we've come up with a number of themes, and I think we've covered a lot of these. Data-driven outcomes will be the new currency within this. Requirement for new business models, which are patient-centric. More integration in terms of integrated health, with long-term patient-centered outcomes at the core, and also different collaborations and alliances when it comes to furthering innovation and science. So this is my final slide before we go into Q&A and Brian's wrap-up. But really, it's all around innovation within collaboration, and really the ability to bring people along in multiple ways. And I think I came from the pharma industry myself. I know it can be quite uncomfortable, and the idea of controlling assets that you don't necessarily own. But nonetheless, in our view, it's the only way that you can go. And I'm really pleased to see so many good examples of where that's happening, and also the backing of the UK government in so many of these really, really important initiatives that we have. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.